and
Right.
this is the sacred science, and the Egyptians understood it very well, and so did all of the other doctrines. Even though, trying to defend, institutionalized religion is a bit like the ACLU. That is the American Civil Liberties Union, being honor bound to defend criminals and murderers who nevertheless have not been afforded their rights under the law. So with the religions, now, I don't know if you follow this argument at all, the Darwinian argument with these two jackasses, Dawkins and Dennett.
Oh, Dawkins, yeah, sure.
These guys, him and Dennett, these are the co-commandants of the latter-day Darwin Jugend.
Yeah, the new bulldogs of Darwin, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. These are the pit bulls of the Darwinian pit bulls. So they're all, rampaging about religion. And let's face it, there's almost nothing that particularly the Western churches can be accused of that they're not guilty of. At the same time, they built the cathedrals of Chartres and the wonderful churches of Italy and so on. And I mean, if this stuff is all delusion and superstition, it means that Bach and Beethoven and Monteverdi and all of the people who wrote all of that glorious music are deluded. They just happen to be talented geniuses, but they don't know what they're talking about. On the other hand, the guys who invented chemical warfare and Walmarts and Disneyland, they know what they're talking about.
Right, yeah.
So,
and the atomic bomb and all that, yeah, sure.
All this horrific stuff. And actually underlying this is coming up in a Phoenix Fire somewhere along, because underlying the Church of Progress, this absolutely malevolent superstition that infects the entire Western world and now the rest of the world entirely, actually its underpinning is nothing but Darwinian evolution, the notion that that we're accidental creations, not even creations is the wrong word, we're accidental accretions in an equally accidental universe, which by definition means that there is no purpose to our existence. So, in fact, all of the lunatic materialism and commercialism and all of this junk that's going on has its intellectual or philosophical support, such as it is, in Darwinian evolution, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the cargo cult of the West. It's the most malevolent superstition ever to infect the human mind. But that's subject for another Phoenix Fire blog along the line.
Very interesting. So let's kind of dive into it a little bit here and talk about a little bit of the science of the Egyptians and the doctrine of immortality, as you mentioned before. And I guess we can preface that by saying or asking that question that you posed at the beginning, that basically simply was that, why should I look at this? Why is this even important to me, who's living, in this age and at this time with our particular problems? What would you say to that type of statement or question?
Well, almost nobody is immune from, let's say, from their own humanity. I should say some people are. George W. Bush is, but and a whole bunch of the people that are there in Washington seem to be immune to it. But other people ask questions. I mean, we don't, with the Darwinian doctrine, I mean, lots of people just live their lives and don't give it a second thought. If you actually give it a second thought, it's not easy to intellectually you can do it, but emotionally accept that your own life is completely meaningless. People don't do that easily. And if you do accept it and you're honest, you become a French existentialist. The existentialists ask, they accepted stupid Darwin at his word. And their question was, well, since life is meaningless, why not commit suicide? And they thought of a whole bunch of reasons. One, it's uncomfortable, and two, you don't like to. But basically, they were honest enough to ask this question. There is, unfortunately, I don't have it somewhere. I read it off in one of my Phoenix Fire blogs. A wonderful statement, eloquent statement by Bertrand Russell about accepting the meaninglessness of life. And it's quite brilliantly written. But if that's what life is about, well, you got to accept it and you got to live it. But if you don't feel that way, and most people don't, I mean, really, horrible as the Western churches have been for 2,000 years, they wouldn't have existed if they were nothing but superstition and stupidity. They continued, they lived for all of its terrible excesses because there was enough of it there, there was enough of a seed of it there, somehow or another. Enough people who actually were practicing Christians, probably it's not even 1%, but enough people who actually lived the doctrine to inspire or to let the others know that there really is or was something there to begin with. So, it's that sense of, I hate to use these words spiritual because they're so Baudelarized by New Age goofballs, right. But without that spiritual, without that sense that we're here for a reason, and then not just the intellectual conviction, but the necessity of leading your life in such a way that you're doing your best to realize what that meaning is, this is in the Bible when Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. That's what he's talking about, the dead people. They're walking around, but they're dead.
Of course, yes.
Dead are the spiritually unaware. And for them, they live their lives, people live their lives, and that's how they live them. But for others, understanding what's involved, and the Egyptians certainly understood it full well. I mean, even the quackademics acknowledge that the entire civilization it's a one-issue civilization, which is the immortality, dedicated to the immortality of the soul. Of course, the quackademics say, wink, wink, nod, nod, we know better. But if that's taken seriously, it means, somebody once described golf as a very simple game that's very difficult to play. And the legitimate path is a bit like that. It's easy to put it into words, few words. I mean, this is what the purpose of life is, to arrive at a level of consciousness that we don't normally have access to, but that many of us, most of us maybe even, especially in childhood, do access, and make that state of consciousness as permanent as possible, or at least have flashes of it often enough so that we know that we're leading our lives constructively rather than destructively. And in Egypt, this was the motivating force of the entire civilization. Everybody, whether it was, you can be sure the priests, the high priests and the architects and the great artists and the pharaohs knew what they were doing, and other people didn't know, but life was orchestrated in such a way that they were in positions where what they were doing in their daily lives was fundamentally creative. This is something that is virtually gone now. Earlier, where was it? Was it on where we were recording it? When we were talking about creativity as the one possible saving grace to get us out of this cataclysm. In fact, even in medieval times, which nobody in their right mind would want to go back to medieval times, with a brutal church and an even more brutal aristocracy in charge. But what people did with their daily lives was fundamentally creative. In other words, if you're a carpenter or a cooper or whatever it was that you were doing, had an element of creativity to it. Being a good peasant is creative. I lived in Spain all those years. Believe me, they were okay. They were tenant farmers and they didn't have much money, but they worked hard. But their lives themselves were expended in activities that were fundamentally creative.
Yes.
With us in our technological society, it's exactly the opposite. Almost nobody gets an opportunity to make a living out of his or her creative faculties.
Sure.
And those that do, 90% of them expend it in stupid stuff. It's very creative. It's creative to create nerve gas. But I don't know if the guy who invents nerve gas comes home and says to his wife, "Whoa, we could kill millions of them with what I did today. I don't know if they really feel proud of themselves for that.
Well, some might do, unfortunately, but yeah.
They probably do. Yeah, well, and the rationale is, well, if I don't invent nerve gas, the other guys over in Russia, they'll invent it. That's right.
Yeah.
So, but the Egyptian doctrine is entirely devoted to that process of acquiring that higher level of consciousness. There's a marvelous line, and it's a Neoplatonic set of essays called the Hermetica. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, indeed, I am.
Yeah. That wonderful line in the Asclepius, as it's called, where Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great, who is the Greekified
Hermes
version of Jehuti, Hermes of the Egyptian Jehuti, the principle of cosmic wisdom, is talking to his disciple Asclepius and about the soul. As for the soul, the belief that it is immortal by nature, or, as I have taught you, may strive to become so, all this they will mock at and even convince themselves that it is false. But the key word to that line is strive to become so. That's what Egypt is actually all about. And because it is deeply hierarchical society, and we really don't know what the teaching methods were like or anything of the sort, but we can see the results in that fabulous art and architecture that you walk into. And the reason that works, I mean, all great sacred art is around the world, the cathedrals of Europe and the mosques of Islam and the temples of India, all embody the knowledge, the same kind of knowledge that the Egyptians had, but the Egyptians manifested it on a magnitude that nobody else has approached, and also with a subtlety that nobody else can quite equal. And what's involved there is that the so-called gods that are snickered at by the academics are, as I said earlier, embodiments of cosmic principles. Those principles are each, for reasons too complicated to go into in our radio talk here, associated with specific numbers which give rise to specific geometries, harmonies, and proportions. So when these are incorporated into a religious structure, a spiritual structure, by people who know what they're doing, what happens is that it communicates literally through music, stone music. It's the same, it's vibrational, the same as music is vibrational.
Yes.
But when you walk into one of those Egyptian temples, what happens is that, and they're all consecrated to different principles and different triads of gods and so on. So, but when you walk into them, you're affected. I mean, your inner nature, your emotional faculties have evoked, the principle itself is evoked within you. So when you walk into an Amun temple, especially the way we do it, which is when nobody else is there, whenever humanly possible, because I go to a lot of great lengths to avoid the crowds and be there at special times.
Yes.
And when you walk in there, suddenly, you realize that you've been buffaloed, you've been conned all your life to thinking that what we have is progress, but also you actually you get the hit from that great religious architecture of the principle to which it is concentrated. So, it's a transformational experience.
So did you experience, let's say, the first time you were down there and visited one of the temples, one of the sites, and looked at this or experienced it for yourself? Was that a spiritual / religious experience for you?
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, I'd had a few of them before. I mean, that led me to that. But as I said, I knew it at age 13 that I'd been born into a lunatic asylum. But gradually over time, there were a few sort of moments of epiphany, as it were. One was, we didn't have any classical music in my house. To my parents, they were nice people, but to them, Rodgers and Hammerstein was classical music. And I only became acquainted with classical music when I was 18 or 19 or thereabouts. And I remember one time, I forget exactly how it was or where it was, but all of a sudden there were the Beethoven late quartets playing. and particularly the quartet in C sharp minor, and that suddenly told me, aha, not everybody is crazy. And then not long after